Hey there folks, how you doing today? Hope you're having an awesome day. It's a beautiful day here, a little on the windy side. That may end up chasing us inside for the rest of this video, but I think I got a good one for you today. I found a really good piece that's an awesome addition to my buck collection, and it comes in this sheath right here. So if you think you'd be interested, stick around. We'll jump into the video. We'll have a closer look at the knife, a little bit of history on the knife, and we'll go into how I was able to narrow down the date range on this knife beyond just the Tang stamp, and with the help of a really good website. So if you're interested, stay tuned. Alrighty, I'm pretty excited about this one. I was quite happy to find it. So here's the sheath. The sheath, unfortunately, isn't in awesome shape. It's not terrible, but you can see it's taken some damage. Somebody's tried to glue it together with some kind of glue or resin here and here. Damage kind of looks almost more recent. You don't see the aging to the leather that you would expect from old damage. But it's not about the sheath, it's about the knife. And here it is. So obviously a buck 110. And it is a 2-dot buck 110, which puts it in the range from 1974 to 1980. Great shape for its age. Didn't have to do any major cleanup, just a little polish to the brass. You can see no major stings or nicks or scratches in the brass. I'd say this thing was rarely used, maybe rarely carried. Lockup is solid. I half think this is still the factory edge. There's not much wear. I don't see any signs of sharpening. So this may well still be the factory edge. Just looks in excellent shape. Very happy to find one in this kind of condition. Everything nice and tight. No big gaps or anything. Channel was nice and clean. You can see the locking bar down there. That locks your back spring in place. It looks like it might be the round bar as opposed to the square bar. But just beautiful condition. Nice ebony scales. Just great shape. So I was very happy to find it like this. Not too often you're going to find one from this period that at least hasn't been used, carried, knocked around some, so great find. Now, in doing some research on this knife to find out more about it, I found some curious things. Number one, the Buck 110, this model, was not the very first knife to be called the Buck 110. Pre the Buck 110 folder from 1955 to 1962, the 103 Skinner, or at least as we know it today, was referred to as the Buck 110. So in 1963, they renamed that to the 103 Skinner, and then the following year, this knife was introduced. Now, some other things I found out was for the 1964 to 1980 version of the 110, there were actually 7 versions with subvariants. So little minor changes that people have noticed that relate to date of production, where it was produced, and little features that they're able to say, you know, This might be a 1974 to 1980 by the Tang stamp, but there's little indicators that allow us to narrow the date down. So with this one here, I was able to narrow it down to a 1977 to 1980. And we'll show you how we did that. But before we do that, let's just do a comparison between this 1970s buck to a modern day buck. So if we look right off the bat, we can see some differences in the sheath. The modern sheath is just a tad bit bigger. And you can see here has a more molded pocket to it. So this is rigid, molded to fit around the knife, where this is a little softer, and just from the knife being in the pouch would have molded to fit the knife. Different button, different stamp. Belt loop rides quite a bit higher on the older version. And you can see both have Buck 110 stamped at the bottom. And that matters for dating too. So prior to 1975, the 110 stamp was up here at the top. And then in 1975, they moved it down to the bottom. So there's one way you can date your knife, or help date your knife, because if the sheath it came with, and is the original sheath to the knife, has the 110 up here, you know it's prior to 1975, and vice versa, if it's down here, it's post 1975. So there's the two side by side. So essentially, basically the same design, but over time, Buck, responding to customer input, has made some changes. And we can see right off the bat that the bolsters and the handles, everything is much more rounded on the more modern Buck. See the older Buck, much more squared off on the bolsters, more squared off on the corners of your handles. You can definitely see it there at the butt. So people responded that, you know, we like it, but it's a little hard in the hand, a little blocky in the hand. Buck responded over time and made those changes. You'll also notice a difference in the handle covers. You can see right off the bat, there's a taper, ever so slight, towards the bolster right here. You can just catch in the light. But also, there's a difference in the wood. The more modern Buck has a laminated, stabilized, I think walnut or birch. I'm not sure. But the older one has ebony wood. And this is a Makassar ebony wood from Indonesia. Gives it a nice, dark, rich look. There's also some notable differences in the blades. Now, both are the same length. Both are a clip point. But you'll notice here, your modern Buck has more of a saber grind, where the earlier Buck has more of a flat grind. The saber grind is going to make for a slicier knife, and I believe that was again some feedback where hunters wanted a slicier blade for skinning and processing. If we look where the tang and the spring meet, you'll notice that in the older knife, it's a bit of a beefier connection, and it's smaller and more rounded in the more modern. And we feel that in the action. It's a much smoother rollout with the modern Buck. With the earlier Buck, more of a step feel to it. So they accomplished that by reducing the size of that connection and rounding it out more. So just feel in the hand. Obviously, your modern buck, for the most part, is going to have a nicer feel in the hand. The older buck, where it's all squared off, you can feel the corners in your hand. It just doesn't fit the hand quite as nicely. And it's got a smaller profile. If you like a bigger profile, then perhaps the older buck's more for your liking. Now, one further difference with the blades is the steel. Your modern buck is made of 440 HC stainless steel. Well, from 1964 to 1980, your blade was made from 440C hand-rolled steel. From 1981 to 1991, they used 425M steel, and it was in 1992 to present when they went for the 440 HC steel. So, how did I narrow the date down on this one beyond the 1974 to 1980 indicated on the Tang stamp? Well, I found a great website, and that website is the historyofthe110.com. And it covers the 110 from 1964 to 1986. And it is credited to Michael D.F. Lowe, with contributions by Vern Taylor, George Stinzel, and Joe Hauser. So from that site, I learned there are 7 versions of the Buck 110 in that time span. And then there are variants under each version. And that all comes down to just minute changes and details within the knife. So let's start looking at some of those. So I'm starting with a 2-dot. So that's a 1974 to 1980. So right off the bat, I know it's a version 5. Now, which are the variants of that version 5? So the 5th version knives were all produced at the North Magnolia Avenue plant in El Cajon, California. Now, one of the first indicators is on the butt. It has a 1/8 inch stainless steel spring holder or spacer between the butt and the bolsters. So that's this little guy right here. And we can look up here at some of the earlier variants of that. So 1972 introduced the 3rd line. So prior to that, your stamp would have just said Buck USA. Well, in 72, they added the 110, making it a 3-line stamp. Prior to 1974, the brass was all hand forged. And starting in 74, they started using a process where they take powdered brass and mold it to create the brass frame. So the next thing we have to look at is the pins. So if you can see here very faintly, there's a single pivot pin here on the blade. And if we look closely here, you can see a pin here and a pin here. So pin placement is part of the identification process for narrowing down what version and what variant you have. You also have to look at the pins holding the scales on. So here it looks like 4 pins, but actually it's 3 pins. 1, 2, 3. This is the pivot or rocker pin that your spring rides on. So there were 2-pin versions, there were 4-pin versions, and each of those can be dated. Now, aside from the number of pins, you also have to look at the size of the pins. Some versions had smaller pins, some versions had more recessed pins, and some versions like this one had the slightly protruding rounded over pins. So the placement of the pivot pin and the butt pins, your rocker pin, and your scale pins, number, size, type, all help me narrow this one down to a version 5 variant 8. And that is a 1977 to 1980. Now, there's also 2 version 9s that range from 1977 to 1980. And one indication here is on the Tang stamp. The version 9 has an elongated buck, so the lettering is taller. And the alignment of the USA underneath of the 110, this one is slightly shifted to the right, as you can see. Well, in the version 9, you have the taller letters and a more centered USA. Now, if you combine that with the sheath, as we already noted, in 1975, they moved the 110 from here to here. So I know my sheath is consistent with the time period for this particular knife. So with all I've been able to learn from that website, I'm fairly confident that this is a 1977 to 1980 version 5 variant 8. There was also, for the version 9, there was a version 9S, and that had a different scale material. So definitely go check out that website, and I will link it in the description below. It has just an astounding amount of information listing where, what production facility made each knife or each version, because Buck moved his facilities around from place to place back then. And just gives you just great detail and just has some fabulous looking examples. It's got just some beautiful knives with particular etchings and limited edition runs and whatnot. And also has a lot of advertising information from the period. And even has the boxes. Now, this one didn't come with the original box, but even gives you ways to date it based on the information on the box, the style of the box, the color of the box, the literature that came in the box, all of that. So, a lot more history in these buck knives than you would think. But for something that's persisted and been as popular as long as it has, I suppose that's not surprising. But just a beautiful knife. I'm just very happy to have acquired this one, particularly in such good condition. Just a great piece. I don't think I'll be carrying this one. I think we're going to preserve this fella. Just, I've got other buck 110s I can carry. This one's going into the collector cabinet. And we'll do a little something with this sheath. I can at least treat it, try and prevent any further deterioration in these damaged sections. Somebody must have, I don't know if he had this on their hip and just caught it on something, or if the dog got a hold of it or what, but I wouldn't feel comfortable carrying it in the sheath. But the nice thing is, even though the model has changed a lot over the years, hasn't changed that much. You can still use a modern sheath with an old buck. It's a little bit tighter because it's a little blockier and thicker, but still works. So I hope you enjoyed the video, folks. I'm just really enjoying having this knife. Couldn't wait to show it off, but just a beautiful piece. I'll call this my Dukes of Hazzard buck, because if not this version, then probably pretty close to this version old Bo and Luke Duke were carrying on their hip back in the Dukes of Hazzard TV show. Anyway, that'll be it for today, folks. I hope you're having an awesome day. And if you're not having an awesome day, go spend some time in the woods. It'll make you feel better. If you're going alone, let somebody know where you're going to be. But otherwise, just go out there, relax, listen to the birds, listen to the breeze in the trees, smell some of the earthy tones and the wildflowers and whatnot. And if you do, take a buck with you. Might just come in handy. You all take care.